Thanksgiving dinner was already loud when my dad decided to make it quieter. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He set his glass down, looked straight at me, and said I was a useless failure. The table went still. My mom nodded like he just stated a fact everyone had been avoiding. My aunt stared into her mashed potatoes. Someone's fork scraped a plate too loudly, then stopped. I waited for the punchline. There wasn't one. "You contribute nothing," my dad said. "You're too old to still be drifting." My mom leaned back in her chair. "If you can't get your life together," she added, "go live in the streets." She said it calmly, almost generously, like she was offering a realistic alternative. No one argued with them. No one told them to stop. I looked around the table and realized something uncomfortable. They all agreed. I stood up slowly, not angry, not shaking. I smiled. It confused them. That part came up later. I grabbed my coat, thanked my aunt for the food, and walked out into the cold without saying another word. Behind me, I heard my dad scoff. "Good luck," he said. 3 weeks later, my phone started ringing nonstop. That's when they found out I earned $25 million a year, and that smiling at that table hadn't been weakness. It had been restraint. But to understand why I didn't correct them that night, you need to know who my parents thought I was before Thanksgiving. To my parents, I was the one who never figured it out, not the troubled one, not the rebellious one, just the disappointment that lingered too long. I didn't follow the path they liked to brag about. No neat titles they could explain to friends. No milestones they understood well enough to celebrate. If they asked what I did for work, it was never curiosity. It was inventory. "So what are you doing now?" The word "now" always carried an expiration date. I kept my answers short. Consulting. Investments. Things that made their eyes glaze over. My mom would nod once and change the subject. My dad would smirk and say something about real jobs. In their version of success, money came with noise. Offices, schedules, people who looked busy enough to impress. I didn't look like that. I worked odd hours. I traveled without explaining why. Some months I was home more than others. To them, that meant unstable, unfocused, failing quietly. They filled in the gaps themselves. At family gatherings, my cousins were paraded out like proof of good parenting. Promotions, engagements, graduate programs. When someone asked about me, my parents answered for me. "He's still figuring things out. He's smart, just not motivated. He never sticks to anything." I never corrected them. Not because they were right, because correcting them would have required explaining a life they'd already decided wasn't worth understanding. My name is Lena. I'm 32. I didn't live at home. I paid my own bills. I hadn't asked my parents for money in over a decade. That part never seemed to register. To them, independence only counted if it looked familiar. An office they could picture, a boss they could imagine yelling at me. I didn't give them that. I ran my work quietly. No announcements. No updates at dinner. When checks came in, I deposited them and went back to whatever I was building next. When deals closed, I didn't celebrate. I moved on. From the outside, it looked like nothing. That made my parents comfortable. My mom liked to remind me how much she worried. My dad liked to remind me how fast time was passing. "You don't want to wake up at 40 with nothing," he used to say. I always nodded, not because I agreed, because arguing would have meant explaining numbers, structures, timelines. And once you explain those things, people start asking questions. I wasn't hiding. I was choosing silence. Over the years, they grew bolder. Small comments turned into jokes. Jokes turned into lectures. By the time Thanksgiving came around that year, they didn't see a daughter sitting at their table. They saw a problem that hadn't resolved itself fast enough. And in their minds, problems only had one solution. You apply pressure until something breaks. Thanksgiving had always been their favorite stage. Extended family. Full table. An audience that already trusted them. My mom spent the morning correcting how I set the plates. My dad commented on how quiet I'd become lately. "You should talk more," he said. "People worry when you disappear like this." I smiled and kept arranging the silverware. By the time we sat down, the room was warm and crowded. Food passed. Small talk floated. I stayed neutral, answered when asked, didn't volunteer anything. That restraint bothered them. Halfway through dinner, my dad cleared his throat, the way he did when he wanted control back. So, he said, glancing around the table, has Lena figured out what she's doing with her life yet? A few people laughed politely. My mom jumped in before I could speak. She's still exploring options. The words still hung there. I felt eyes on me, waiting, expecting embarrassment. I didn't rush to fill the silence. That's when my dad leaned back and said it. That's because she's a failure. He said it evenly, no anger, like a conclusion he'd reached after careful thought. My mom nodded. We've tried helping. She just doesn't want to work. Someone gasped quietly. Someone else pretended not to hear. The room shifted. I realized then this wasn't frustration spilling over. This was deliberate. They wanted the table to agree with them, and they were about to push harder until it did. They didn't stop. Once the word was out, they built on it. My dad listed everything he thought was wrong with me. Unstable, unfocused, ungrateful. My mom added her own version. Too sensitive, too private, always disappearing when things got difficult. Each sentence landed like it had been rehearsed. I watched my relatives react in small ways. A raised eyebrow, a tight smile, a quick sip of wine. No one challenged them. I could feel the moment tipping. The one where silence starts to look like agreement. That's when my mom leaned forward and said it. If you can't get your life together, she said, you shouldn't be here. The table went still again. Go live in the streets, my dad added. He laughed once. Soft, confident. That was the part that settled it for me. They weren't trying to scare me. They were trying to humiliate me into compliance. I looked down at my plate. Then I stood up. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. I smiled. It wasn't a big smile. Just enough. Enough to make my mom pause. Enough to make my dad narrow his eyes. I picked up my coat. Thanks for dinner, I said, calm and even. No defense. No explanation. I walked out while they were still deciding whether I was joking. Behind me, I heard my dad say, she won't last a week. I didn't turn around. Some things are easier to explain later, after you've already left. I didn't go back. Not that night. Not the next morning. I checked into a hotel a few blocks away and slept better than I had in months. No tension. No commentary waiting for me over coffee. Over the next few days, my phone stayed quiet. No apologies. No follow-ups. I think they assumed I'd cool off, that I'd come back embarrassed, ready to explain myself, that he'd trained me to do that. What they didn't know was that I already had a life that didn't include them. My work didn't stop because of Thanksgiving. Calls still came in. Deals still closed. On Monday, I spent 3 hours on a video call with partners in 2 different time zones. By Wednesday, a contract I'd been negotiating for months finally cleared legal. On Friday, the wire hit. 7 figures. Clean. Expected. I didn't celebrate. I never did. Money had stopped feeling emotional a long time ago. It was just confirmation that the system I'd built worked. 3 weeks passed. Then my phone started lighting up. First my mom, then my dad, then numbers I hadn't seen in years. Voicemails stacked up. Texts grew longer. The tone had changed. Confused. Urgent. Careful. That's when I realized something had reached them. Not the full picture. Just enough to make them nervous. And nervous people start asking questions they should have asked much earlier. I didn't answer right away. I let the calls ring. Let the messages sit unread. When I finally listened to the first voicemail, my mom sounded different. Not angry. Not disappointed. Uncertain. Lena, she said, drawing my name out like it might soften things. We need to talk. There's been some confusion. Confusion was their favorite word when control slipped. My dad's message came next. Shorter. Careful. Call us back. It's important. No lectures. No advice. That's how I knew something had shifted. I found out later how it started. One of my cousins had mentioned a number. Not the full story. Just a figure she'd overheard from someone who worked with someone I'd partnered with years ago. It wasn't even accurate. It was close enough. From there, things unraveled quickly. My parents started asking questions they'd never bothered to ask before, searching my name, calling people they hadn't spoken to in years. By the time they understood the scale of it, the damage was already done. They hadn't just misjudged me. They'd publicly disowned someone who earned $25 million a year. And suddenly, Thanksgiving looked very different in hindsight. So did the things they'd said at that table, especially the part where they told me to live in the streets. Because now they were trying to figure out how to walk that back, without admitting they'd ever pushed me there in the first place. They asked to meet the following week. Neutral place. Quiet restaurant. My mom said it would be good to clear the air. I agreed, not because I needed closure, because I was curious how they'd frame it. They arrived early. My dad stood when he saw me. My mom smiled too fast. We ordered. Small talk first. Weather. Traffic. Then my mom reached across the table and touched my hand like she used to when I was a kid. "We've been worried about you," she said softly. We didn't realize things were going well. There it was. Not an apology. A correction. My dad cleared his throat. "If you'd told us," he said, "Thanksgiving wouldn't have happened the way it did." I pulled my hand back. "You mean," I said, "if you'd known I wasn't useless." They exchanged a look. "That's not what we meant," my mom said quickly. "We just didn't understand." I nodded. "You understood enough to throw me out," I said. "You just didn't think it would cost you anything." The table went quiet. My dad shifted in his seat. "We're still your parents. That's biology," I said, "and not behavior." My mom's eyes filled. "Right on schedule." "We're proud of you," she said. The words sounded new in her mouth. I leaned back. 3 weeks ago," I said calmly, "you told me to live in the streets." I let that sentence sit between us. It was heavier than anything else on the table, and for the first time, neither of them tried to push it away. They started negotiating without calling it that. My dad talked about miscommunication. My mom talked about stress, about how hard the holidays were, about how families say things they don't mean. I listened. Then my mom mentioned Thanksgiving next year, how it wouldn't feel right without me there. That's when I understood what this was really about. It wasn't regret. It was optics. They didn't like how the story ended, how it sounded when people repeated it back to them. My dad finally said it out loud. "We should move past this," he said. "You're doing well now. That's what matters." I smiled, the same way I had at their table. "No," I said. "What mattered was how you treated me when you thought I wasn't." The words landed cleanly. No edge. No heat. My mom wiped at her eyes. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying we're not close," I replied. "And pretending otherwise doesn't fix what happened." Silence settled in. Not dramatic. Just final. When the check came, I paid it. Not to prove anything. Out of habit. We stood. They hugged me like people who weren't sure they were allowed to. Outside, my dad said, "Call us sometime." I nodded. I didn't promise anything. Some distances aren't created by space. They're created by moments you don't get to redo. After that, the calls slowed down. Not immediately, but noticeably. My mom still sent messages on holidays. My dad still left voicemails that started strong and ended uncertain. They were careful now. Measured. They'd learned something, even if they'd never say it out loud. I didn't cut them off. I didn't confront them again. I just stopped performing. No updates. No explanations. No attempts to make my life legible to them. Work continued. Quietly. Successfully. 25 million a year sounds unreal to people who measure worth out loud. To me, it was just the byproduct of years spent building without permission. Sometimes I think about that Thanksgiving table, the confidence in my dad's voice, the way my mom nodded along, how certain they were that I had nowhere to go. They weren't wrong about everything. I did leave. I just didn't end up where they thought I would. The smile that night wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't pride. It was the moment I realized I didn't need to correct them to move on. Some people only respect you once they know your value. Others don't get access once they've proven they only care about it.